My name is Faith Walker, and I'm the director of the Great Bend Museum in Ravenswood. We were founded in 1972 by the Jackson County Historical Society to share the history of our county and the Ohio River's Great Bend region. In 2020, the Historical Society gave the museum and collection to the city of Ravenswood to carry on its mission of preserving and promoting county history. Tonight's lecture is part of our monthly event calendar and takes place on the 66th anniversary of Kaiser Aluminum beginning production here. Dr. Ric Dias, professor of history at Northern State University in South Dakota, is joining us tonight to talk about the history and significance of Kaiser Aluminum's plant here. His presentation will last about half an hour, at which point we will have time for questions. If you have any questions during his presentation, please put them in the comments section for this YouTube video, and I'll read them to him at the end. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Dias.
Okay. And okay, am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Hello, my name is Ric Dias, and I'm the author of this book, actually, Kaiser Steel of Fontana, Together We Build. And I'm interested in the Kaiser story. In addition to this book, I've also written on Henry Kaiser and the steel company, bearing his name in article form and in presentations. I am new to the aluminum side of the story. In addition to that, I have a car, a Kaiser automobile. I've had this car for over 40 years. So I think we could say that I really am familiar also with the entire Kaiser story. Now, I'm making this webcast because I enjoy this Kaiser story. And the fact that I live in South Dakota makes it too difficult for me to be there in person in a very low-tech way, face-to-face with you and you nice folks in West Virginia. Now, I'm thinking that you're here because you have an interest, a knowledge, and quite likely a firsthand experience with Kaiser Aluminum, which operated a major facility in Ravenswood for over 3 decades. As a measure of the influence that Henry Kaiser, who was the founder and leader of Kaiser Aluminum, had on your city, look no farther than Henry J. Kaiser Elementary School, which is located on Kaiser Avenue, no less. Perhaps you or someone near you has attended. And you folks might be interested to know that there are other schools across America that have schools named for him as well. Each of these cities has a school named after Kaiser because he left a very big footprint there as well. Henry J. Kaiser High School in Fontana, California was so named because the Kaiser plant, the Kaiser steel plant, operated there for about 40 years. Now, this is the motto for the Henry Kaiser School, Together We Build, which was also the motto of Kaiser Steel and the subtitle to my book. This motto, Together We Build, was used across the Kaiser family of businesses. So you folks might have seen this motto a little close to home as well. But they're not alone. There's Henry J. Kaiser High School in Honolulu, Hawaii, because Henry Kaiser, in his retirement years, spent time in Oahu doing commercial and residential development. And then lastly, there's in Oakland, California, Henry J. Kaiser Jr. Elementary School, because that city was the base of operation for the Kaiser family businesses for about half a century. It's not common to have a school named after you, much less 4, but Kaiser's impact on communities was often pretty significant. So let's look at the career of this impactful man, Henry John Kaiser, the growth of his business empire, special attention paid to his aluminum business, and see how it and Ravenswood all fit. So who was this guy? He was born in 1882 in a rural part of upstate New York called Sproutbrook. Henry received several years of public education, but he did not complete high school, which wasn't unusual. Lots of people, innumerable people, famous and ordinary, did not, and that remained common into the 20th century. For example, auto pioneer Henry Ford's a well-known example here. Henry Kaiser left school early to work. He loved work and he was good at it. As a teen, he had a number of different jobs. For example, he briefly worked in a photography shop in New York, and he promised his customers, I think this is important to understanding him, he promised his customers the cheapest, fastest, best photos. He wasn't all work, though, and young Henry found a girl, and to gain approval of her skeptical father, I love that part of the story, Kaiser struck out for the West in the early 20th century to make his fortune. He quickly achieved success, impressed the father, and won the girl. He entered municipal construction at that point in his life, and this, in one form or another, he stayed with his entire life. Years later, in fact, he would say, quote, "Well, I'm just a sand and gravel man," unquote. He grew his construction firm greatly and again promised speedy completion and coming in under budget. He consistently embraced new technologies and new practices. He loved upsetting established leadership. He thought himself quite a maverick. Henry J. and his wife Bess built a business and a family. So in this picture here, in the to our left, is Henry Jr.
Hey, Rick, I'm just going to
Yes.
introduce you real fast. Be sure that you share your Prezi. Share screen.
Oh, okay. I thought I was. Let me go back here. I thought I did. Let's see. Oh, but here. You see it now? I just hit share.
Yes, we can see it now.
Great, great. Okay. So this is a family shot here. Okay. So that is Henry Jr. on the left. That's his firstborn. And then next to him is Edgar, who becomes his right-hand man. And then I'm not sure, right? So there's Henry there smiling. I think that the person on the right, that might be Joe Frazier of the automobile division. So Kaiser established his base of operations and his family home in Oakland, across the bay from San Francisco. To get ahead of the story a little bit, Henry is in fact buried in Oakland, as is his first wife, Bess. So Kaiser, I think it's safe to say, relentlessly pushed his company forward in the years ahead. The jobs got a lot bigger, highways and bridges and tunnels, mostly in the American West. And then he teamed up with some established outfits like Bechtel, and he built some very high-profile dams that are quite famous today even. This is, of course, Hoover, also known as Boulder Dam, Bonneville, and Grand Coulee. Kaiser had a hand in all those. So by this time, Uncle Sam became his chief source of projects and funding and various other kinds of assistance. And Hurry Up Henry, that's a nickname he acquired, one of his many nicknames, I should say, made sure these gigantic projects, as big as they might be, always got done under budget and before deadline. He became something of a celebrity, actually, and got more nicknames like, America's can-do capitalist. He was talked about as a potential political office holder and even became the subject of pop songs, as shown here on this image. And in the early 1940s, even in the late 1930s, Kaiser made a big change in what his companies did, pivoting from construction, which is to say sort of moving from site to site, building things with a largely new workforce, to manufacturing, making things at a certain site, a fixed site with a fixed workforce too. Now, the first thing that Kaiser produced in place was aggregate, sand and gravel and such, which he ricocheted to after dam building. Next, and this was completely out of the blue, came building shipyards for cargo ships, for first the British and then the US governments. And then making the ships themselves, the famous Liberty ship primarily, perhaps you've heard of them. That's an astounding leap. I don't know how you even think you can go from building shipyards to ships, but if you know a little bit about Henry J. Kaiser, that's kind of par for the course for him. not being locked to the past, always thinking of better, faster, better ways of doing things. He famously employed thousands of women at his West Coast shipyards when he couldn't find enough men. Now, it's about this same time that Kaiser jumped in to metal making, first steel and magnesium. And somehow, just about everything commenced production seemingly overnight. Here's another popular nickname he got about this time, Miracle Man Kaiser. Worth noting about his brand new metal making operations, magnesium and steel, is where they were located, small towns. So when it came to his brand new steel plant, he set that up in a rural, unincorporated part of Southern California, Fontana, nestled among the citrus that you can see here and nearby vineyards. Why? Why Fontana? It's true that Fontana was close to a couple of important ore sources, iron ore and limestone. Those are important, needed for the steelmaking process. But I should underscore, he was nowhere close to coal, and he needed mountains of it to make steel. He had to haul coal by train a budget-busting 1,000 miles. But tiny agricultural Fontana had established rail and highway lines, and most importantly, proximity, just 50 miles to an urban area that was growing fast and was consuming steel, Los Angeles. Note, Fontana, nowhere near his shipyards. And this fact of proximity trumped everything when it came to location for Kaiser. And so for placing his magnesium operation, the thinking was similar. Now, you folks might be aware of Salinas, California, but how about Manteca or Moss Landing? All three of these places were part of the magnesium operation at that same time, and they boasted of established transportation lines, proximity to ore, but most importantly, proximity to markets, the San Francisco Bay Area in this case. Kaiser often chose small towns near large markets. More on this in a few minutes. So, how did that pivot to manufacturing go for Henry Kaiser during the war? New shipbuilder Kaiser made over 1,500 cargo vessels. They called him Sir Launcelot. New magnesium maker Kaiser made plenty of metal, but most attention has gone to the 40,000 tons of product at that point referred to as goop that was used in incendiary bombs and dropped in World War II. New steelmaker Kaiser made 1 million tons of steel and hundreds of thousands of artillery shell casings. And new sand and gravel man Kaiser, he had trucks and product at California job sites. The trucks were unforgettably painted pink and fuchsia. I remember them in my youth. At the close of World War II, many people thought Henry J. was a national hero. Kaiser didn't take a vacation or even pause when the war ended in 1945 after all his tireless work. Instead, he expanded several operations he was already doing and moved into new ones. Kaiser started home building, making over 100,000 affordable and again mass-produced homes on the West Coast. And 4 houses for a brief time. He made dishwashers that used, this is kind of a novel idea, using just municipal water pressure to clean items inside instead of a pump. To be honest, they were terrible. They were short-lived, but they are, and I guess he would like it this way, an often overlooked failure on his part. And speaking of failures, as you might not have seen this image earlier, his automaking operation, Kaiser Fraser. This is my 1951 business coupe here with the lovely Shelley at the wheel. Kaiser Fraser built 750,000 automobiles in 7 years. But Kaiser Fraser bled money, and so after a few years, ceased operations. It's not a total failure, however, as Kaiser Fraser purchased, this will be a familiar name to some of you, Willis Overland, who made Jeeps. And Kaiser, as the parent operation, oversaw Jeep and made Jeeps until 1970. So when looking back at Kaiser's career, I tend to look at automaking as a long-term success, right? Kaiser Industries, which was sort of the mothership of Kaiser firms for a number of years, jumped into this brand new post-World War II medium of television in a big way. They opened a bunch of stations across America and called that Kaiser Broadcasting. Kaiser Aluminum sponsored its own show on television. This was on the NBC network, the Kaiser Aluminum Hour, right? And it made dramas. And if this was interesting to go look back now and to see some of these folks who were like just being introduced in the front end of their careers. The Kaiser Aluminum Hour could boast of these unknown actors like Paul Newman, Dennis Hopper, and Natalie Wood. And Kaiser Industries also sponsored a show on ABC starring the dashing actor, young and unknown at the time, James Garner. And the show was called Maverick. You remember it? So in this image here, we have Kaiser in the middle, beaming, right? He loved the idea and he loved the name Maverick. And to the right is the dashing Garner. And to the left, his right-hand man, second son, Edgar, who looks, well, less impressed. And in the late 1940s, when Kaiser the Maverick was leaping into making everything, he entered aluminum making. And there was not a lot of crossover between what he had been doing and making aluminum, which was the same story when he jumped into making ships or steel for that matter. But he was just fascinated with lightweight materials like magnesium and aluminum. And he figured that even if it was a new venture for him, as always capable lieutenants would somehow just figure it out. They always had. Now, he had wanted to enter aluminum making in World War II, but he couldn't make that happen. He had to wait. Remember that Kaiser always wanted to make things cheaper and better and faster? Well, in his mind, making items out of lightweight materials was central to that. He spread that across an economy, right? He actually envisioned and wrote about a post-war America in which Americans would commonly have their own flying cars or even helicopters made out of aluminum. During the Second World War, he employed a small number of men experimenting in something called his Hobby Lobby there in the San Francisco area, making things with aluminum and magnesium, things like hand tools and auto bodies and everything in between. He called aluminum, and this is his words, the metal of the future. And like the other metals that Henry Kaiser got into, he wanted to control multiple steps in the process of making it, starting with digging ore out of the ground, and this is how aluminum looks as an ore. This is bauxite, all the way up to selling consumer-ready products. That is to say, Kaiser insisted on vertical integration to be fully integrated in aluminum, as he had been in magnesium and as he had been in steel. So the first aluminum plant he gained control of was right after the war, 1946, in Meade, Washington. It was owned by Uncle Sam and controlled by industry giant Alcoa, a name familiar to some of you, no doubt. Now, at that Meade facility, they took processed bauxite and then turned that into aluminum, which could be then rolled or extruded or forged. And so when Kaiser then took control over the Trentwood plant, which is also, like Meade, a wartime rolling facility. Right? Now, they were in small places, Meade and Trentwood, but they were located near a larger place, Spokane. Spokane, a bigger city, was natural because it had aluminum customers nearby. Something else. That area was awash in cheap electricity, gobs of which are needed for the reduction of bauxite and the rolling process in aluminum. And there was gobs of power in that Spokane area because of the Grand Coulee Dam. And who helped build the Grand Coulee Dam? Oh yeah, Henry Kaiser. Now, Uncle Sam needed to unload a lot of these war plants, these war babies after 1945. So Henry Kaiser got Meade and Trentwood for a great price. And if that wasn't enough, that same year, just a little bit later, he took over operation of another existing plant in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on the banks of the Mississippi River, close to the Gulf of Mexico. And that plant reduced ore, bauxite, into the first step, reduced it to alumina. And then that alumina could be sent to the Washington plants. It could be sent to some later plants he built in Louisiana and to Ravenswood, West Virginia, a few years down the road. And those facilities produce the light silver material we know as aluminum and other, cans and other consumer-ready products. Again, Henry Kaiser wanted to control every step in the production process that he could, not to be dependent on any other company, if he could help it. So he signed a sweet deal with that 800-pound gorilla in the room, Alcoa, to supply him with all the ore that he could use for his first few years. Why would Alcoa want to give this deal to Kaiser? Right? Well, Kaiser was in this great place because Alcoa needed to show Uncle Sam that it wasn't running an aluminum monopoly in America. So they cut this great deal with Kaiser, and so he worked closely with Alcoa. And beyond securing these plants, Kaiser did that next step. He secured ore mines, and with aluminum bauxite, with aluminum ore increasingly being started in the Caribbean, Kaiser went overseas and bought mines in Jamaica. And so his Louisiana plants could then refine it, not have to depend on Alcoa. So again, why did Kaiser want to vertically integrate? Why all the added steps? Why not just buy slabs of aluminum from some existing producer like Reynolds or Alcoa, right? And then just rely on like forging or extruding or rolling, just closer to the consumer. Right? Well, industry leaders, the big boys, that's what they all did. They were all vertically integrated. That's what success looked like. That's what leadership looked like. There were two giants in steel and two giants in aluminum for decades, and all of those companies, all four of them, were vertically integrated. Okay? Mind and metal. It might seem questionable from our perspective today for a company to want to do that and remain profitable, but from Henry Kaiser's perspective, back in the 1940s and 50s, well, that's what success looked like. He didn't want to be a niche player. He wanted to go big. So that's why Kaiser, when he laid out his plans to build this aluminum firm, he wanted to be, as they say, soil to foil, dirt to finished product, fully integrated, which sometimes meant having specialized facilities very far spread apart. And this is the context that brought Kaiser to West Virginia. And that's what came in 1954. So Kaiser, or I should say Ravenswood, was not sitting on this great ore source here, all this bauxite, but it was sitting on a terrific transportation system, super cheap water transportation. And like in Fontana with the steel plant, proximity to markets. About 3/4 of all of the aluminum consumers in America were within a reasonable proximity to Ravenswood, a few hundred miles away. Like Fontana, Ravenswood didn't boast of a government war plant that Kaiser could just buy up cheap. He had to build all new, greenfield, as they say. Now, Ravenswood didn't have gobs of cheap hydropower, as did the Washington sites, but Kaiser got a workable deal with local coal-burning utility providers. So ore processed initially at Kaiser's Louisiana facility, which made alumina, could be cheaply shipped up the Mississippi River to Ravenswood for finishing, right? So once here, the aluminum would be reduced in a smelter to aluminum and then be finished. Now, the company estimated that its Midwestern and Eastern customers saved an amazing 75% on shipping costs if they purchased West Virginia-made aluminum over Washington-made product. So I've heard a legend, a local legend that perhaps you folks have heard too, that Henry J. first came to Ravenswood to see a sporting event. That might indeed be true. Kaiser has two biographies, and neither of them say that. But one of Henry J's biographers did say that Ravenswood was, and I quote, the most important addition to Kaiser's rapidly expanding aluminum empire in the 1950s, unquote. So when Henry Kaiser traveled to Ravenswood in 1955 to make a speech, one of his biographers said that he was, and I quote, treated like visiting royalty, unquote. He was given an honorary doctorate by a West Virginia college. Not bad for a high school dropout. Remember, he was a national figure, a hero, nearly a superhero. He regularly performed miracles. What could he do for Ravenswood? He told the eager crowd in a speech that among the 40 plus numbers of locations that were under consideration for building the plant, in addition to the reasons cited by Kaiser engineers and accountants, they came to choose this small town, and I quote Kaiser now, most of all because we like the people here, the spirit of cooperation, and a substantial evidence that we would be welcome, unquote. Ravenswood commenced production in November of 1957, shown here, and was a successful operation right away. Indeed, the new aluminum plant changed Ravenswood greatly. Its population grew about 4 times, 400% in just a few years. Kaiser was an interesting business leader. The day-to-day operation of any of his enterprises, he usually didn't care too much about unless there was a problem he needed to fix. Instead, he really enjoyed planning for the future, setting up a new operation in some new area with some new people. He liked to think the big thoughts, generally leaving the day-to-day operation to lieutenants to carry out. Kaiser's aluminum business, as far as I can tell, was run the same way. He never became a regular daily presence in Ravenswood. But it was at the front end of the aluminum operations life where Kaiser spent most of his time there. One former Ravenswood resident contacted me to share her memories of her grandfather, construction man Ray Ritchie, and the relationship he had with Henry Kaiser, a man Ritchie called his friend. This person told me she remembers Kaiser being at the Ritchie family home, and that Kaiser bought some land from the Ritchie family. Now, some of you might have such memories as well, and I hope you share them after I'm done with my remarks. It's sometimes said that Kaiser had 2 great long-term successes, healthcare and aluminum. Henry Kaiser is one of the very few business leaders who accurately saw how much aluminum usage would explode after World War II. Almost none of his steel or contractor buddies joined him, and they could have. He inquired. That's Henry Kaiser being all maverick again. Kaiser Aluminum was profitable right from the start. Even his first year of operation, 1946, startup and all that, the firm still reported a $5 million profit. Jumping ahead, by the late 1960s, when Henry J. died, Kaiser Aluminum regularly generated the biggest and most consistent profits, tens of millions of dollars, and sales figures, hundreds of millions of dollars, the largest of any of Kaiser's companies, and that's by a large margin. For years, Kaiser Aluminum was the nation's 3rd largest producer, smelting ore and selling shapes and foil. Kaiser Aluminum sold to Boeing and Martin Marietta for the Space Shuttle program, Ford and Caterpillar. Arguably the first, and I know when you say you're the first at something, you're inviting a fight, but arguably the first American all-aluminum beverage can was rolled out in the late 1950s by Coors using Kaiser aluminum stock. The Ravenswood facility alone had 60 acres under roof. His spectacular success and across Kaiser Aluminum, by the time he died, was some 20,000 employees, right, working in over 30 sites. That's enough to make all the naysayers eat crow. One of Henry J's biographers called creating Kaiser Aluminum, and I quote, one of his most brilliant decisions. But in the 1970s and 80s, the metal markets began to churn. It's no longer the go-go 1950s and 60s when aluminum demand in the U.S. would sometimes increase 10% in a year. For example, in the 1980s, American steel and and foundries were shutting down. They were just devastated. It's a picture of the Kaiser steel plant in Southern California. And the Fontana plant shuttered its furnaces in 1983. Increasing costs, energy, environmental, employee insurance and pension, not to mention growing global competition. And for our story here, plunging aluminum costs all took their toll on once mighty Kaiser Aluminum. So in the 1980s, Kaiser Aluminum began selling assets and shedding divisions. Corporate raiders fleeced the company of assets as they did Kaiser Steel. It would have been unthinkable just a few years before. But the Ravenswood facility was sold in 1989 as part of this bloodletting. The model of success that Kaiser had used to build up Kaiser Aluminum, a fully integrated operation, didn't have a place for Ravenswood anymore, right? A much smaller Kaiser Aluminum stumbled forward, actually even going through bankruptcy in the early 2000s. It remains a producer today. Now, the Ravenswood facility, under new management and using a couple of different names like Century and Constellium, has continued to make aluminum products. Now, when making aluminum came to Ravenswood in the 1950s, its location and size, its access to material and markets, its water transportation, and its people all made a great place to operate a plant. And Ravenswood was an integral part of a multinational company with a really impressive 30-year run of success. But the economics in aluminum making changed dramatically, and Ravenswood plant no longer made sense to Kaiser Aluminum accountants. But the story of Ravenswood having 3 decades of success with Kaiser, not to mention its time with other companies, is impressive. It's a story worth telling. It shows us American industry at high tide and the amazing vision of one of America's great business figures. And as a final tip of the hat to Henry Kaiser, I just learned a couple of days ago that even though it was 60 years after the Ravenswood plant began and 30 years after that plant was sold and that same plant having new management and new names, many in your town still call that operation Kaiser. So thank you. That's those are my remarks. And I would like to thank some people for this presentation, especially Faith for working through this amazing challenge of technology and so forth. If any of you would like to have a signed copy of my book on Kaiser Steel, my email address is there. So I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really, really wonderful. And thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. We hope that you've enjoyed the presentation. And now we're moving on to the second part. If you have any questions, this is now the Q&A session. So please add your questions to the live chat section of the YouTube video, and we'll try to get them answered. We're going to give a couple minutes for people to do that. I'm watching the chat. If you're not sure where to access the chat, you can also just post it in a comment on any of our Facebook, actually, preferably the most recent Facebook post about this event, and we can get it answered. While we wait for that, I have a question. What was your favorite part about researching the Kaiser story in Ravenswood? Well, 2 questions really. Also, what makes the Ravenswood plant the most unique to you?
Unique. My favorite part about just doing the little bit of digging that I've done is the kind of human side to the story. And when you think about some major industrialist or business leader, it could be anybody, you think about board meetings and you think of them being stern or perhaps not having a personality or a family and so forth. And I knew that Kaiser had a close working relationship with a small knot of managers. But to get some insight from people about how Henry Kaiser dealt with the people of Ravenswood was really fascinating to me, right? That he would go into people's homes, go into people's stores, make personal relationships and connections with people, travel around with people. I thought that was really terrific. And I wasn't able to get much of that from my steel research, but I spent many years looking into Kaiser's steel operation. I never get a sense of him as a person very much. And once again, my time spent digging on Kaiser Aluminum is much briefer, but I really have a better sense about him as a person. And so it kind of fleshed out this incomplete image I had of him. And so I think that is um, I think the most interesting for me. And was fascinated to know that the aluminum facility, the operation there at Ravenswood continues to this day. And I think that a lot of people across America, if they're familiar with the Kaiser Aluminum story at all, first they're surprised that Kaiser Aluminum is still around. It is still, and some years post $1 billion in sales. It's a very different kind of company than it was many years ago. And I think that they will assume also, and actually I did, that the Ravenswood facility had shuttered up in the 1980s and was closed. And so I was interested to find out that it's still functioning and employing many people. And for those of you in the audience, you might find interesting, I did show a picture, my favorite picture of Kaiser Steel. It's taken in the mid 1960s. The Kaiser plant was integrated, right? And so it took rocks in one end and sent out pipes and sheet and shapes at the other end, right? And so the costly part was the front end, was taking ore and turning it into metal. And so Kaiser Steel shut its doors in 1983, and the company was all carved up, and so, but some folks got to the plant right away, the front end of the plant, right? And so there's been an operation making steel at Fontana since the 1980s called California Steel Industries. It's a consistent moneymaker too. They just don't make the metal there anymore. So it's like Ravenswood, right? And so metal is brought in, right? And then it's made into consumer ready products. And I think that's the profitable way to go now in metal making. Oftentimes, so Ravenswood and Fontana are both the same in that way, right? They used to be fully integrated, or they used to be integrated, but that's very costly in today's environmental sort of environment, if you will. If the costs of making metal are such that it's probably best to buy metal already made from some other provider, and then to use other facilities to roll, stamp, extrude, and so forth to shape. So I have found there was much about Ravenswood I have found interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we see all the time train cars passing through town that are loaded up with maybe 20 ingots of aluminum that are the size of a car, each of them.
Yeah, right.
And you can tell the trains are really, really heavy, and they're just crawling through town, and there's only like 5 or so cars on it, because that's just how much aluminum is being transported to the plant.
Yeah. And I don't have a percentage number for you, but so much of the aluminum that we use today is recycled, whether it can be lawn chairs or, monster juice cans, but the amount of aluminum, the amount of energy it takes to take a hunk of bauxite and turn it into that shiny metal that we recognize is such that it makes it's much more cost advantageous to recycle aluminum product than it is to take ore and turn it into aluminum. So even though I live in a very isolated area, I live in South Dakota, a small town, South Dakota, I can sell aluminum to a recycler for 25 cents a pound, right? And it's still profitable for all these people to take aluminum from places as isolated as Aberdeen, South Dakota, and take it someplace to be melted down, turned into some new product, as opposed to going to some other country, digging ore out of the ground, bringing it over here, reducing that to alumina, taking it alumina and turning it into aluminum. So much more cost effective that I even get money for aluminum here.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We're still waiting on questions in the chat. For anybody who can't find the chat, it is to the immediate right of the YouTube video. It says top chat and then an arrow down. And feel free to drop any questions you have in there, or write them on our Facebook post on the Great Bend Museum's Facebook page. In the meantime, my other question is, oh, hang on. We have an incoming comment. One moment.
Okay.
Let's see. Gotta navigate to it. Okay, never mind. Just somebody saying, really great job. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay. You know, I was interested to find out just recently that so many people in Ravenswood still refer to the facility as Kaiser. So you're rather new, Faith, to Ravenswood. You didn't grow up there. When you came, did you quickly learn that it was called, that some people would refer to as Kaiser? Is that something you learned kind of early?
Oh yeah, and I do too, actually. I
You
still
do too.
call it
That's
Kaiser
great.
Aluminum. And I know people who work at, it's currently Constellium, and I'm still like, oh, you work at Kaiser, and they just like look at me.
That's great.
And-
That's fantastic. Okay.
but yeah, to me, even, you know, oh gosh, however long ago it left town, it's still, you
Yeah.
know, that was a whole generation ago, and it's still
Yeah.
Kaiser
Oh,
Aluminum to
right.
me.
Yeah, you're right. That's exactly it. 30
Yeah.
years, right. Well, you know, I grew up with Kaiser around me. I grew up in Northern California, and this base of operations was in Northern California, in Oakland, right? So um, Kaiser Hospital was there, Kaiser Permanente, Kaiser Sand and Gravel, those pink and fuchsia trucks all over the place, right? Kaiser Engineers, Kaiser Broadcasting, Channel 44 to San Francisco. I used to watch it, right? So I grew up with Kaiser. So maybe it's not surprising that, you know, I ended up writing on Kaiser. But I think for folks in Ravenswood, it's much more tightly focused, right? Or maybe Kaiser Aluminum. That
Yeah.
their introduction to Kaiser is that way.
Yeah. So Sandra Young asks, did Henry Kaiser or his sons start the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system?
Yeah, they did. And so that's a great question. And so I think I might have used a term like Kaiser family of businesses, and it really was. It was a family of businesses. And so when Kaiser made that transition from construction to manufacturing, when he had to deal with a fixed workforce, and especially when those workforces sometimes had difficult, jobs to do, dangerous jobs to do. He had to think about the healthcare of his workers. And while he was still in construction, and his construction went from like making him like he made the Trans-Cuban Highway, for example. We started getting bigger projects like this highway, and then those big dams. Wow! Then he had these huge workforces. So going to be a larger construction outfit and then a manufacturer, it made economic sense for him to provide health care to his workers. It was good for his bottom line. Now, as far as I could tell, Henry J. Kaiser was a really nice man. The people said he was a nice man oftentimes. I spoke to this one retired steelworker. She was a little girl when Henry Kaiser made this trip to the plant in the 1950s, and she walked into this room and Kaiser was there unexpectedly. Then she was hustled out of there, and she told her mother, Mom, I just saw God. You know, so I think that a lot of people looked up to Kaiser and they found him a nice man, but he's a businessman, and he didn't make money just for money's sake. He didn't live opulently, but he liked to turn a profit. You know, he really liked to be successful, and it made dollars and cents sense for him to provide health care for his workers. And so starting with some dam projects, some of the later ones, and then Kaiser Steel, when it opened right away in 42, had the Kaiser Permanente plan for workers. It was a few pennies per paycheck. It was very cheap back then. You could buy it for your family as well. So it starts with his company, and then it becomes a provider of healthcare outside of Kaiser itself, right? To anyone, right, could become a member. Yep, Sammy. And so Kaiser Aluminum, Kaiser Steel, Kaiser. There's a Kaiser Broadcasting. There's actually still a Kaiser Air. It's a air service provider in Oakland. All those Kaiser named companies are all the same Henry J. Kaiser.
That's crazy and
It
really
is.
cool how all of these seemingly very, very different industries are sort of connected
Yeah,
behind the scenes in
yeah.
a sense. Yeah.
And I don't. It's hard to imagine a business school encouraging, its graduates. Yes, go out and try to make everything. Don't just a complete scattergun approach. When you think about, you know, being a fully integrated steel and aluminum maker, and also a person who built houses and dishwashers and cars, and then owning a bunch of like TV stations, it almost doesn't make any sense. But that's exactly the scope of his operations.
Yeah.
It's
And our
amazing.
sorry. And
Yeah.
at our museum, actually, we have the cover of a newsletter, Kaiser News,
Oh,
that
yeah.
was that was, a monthly newsletter that was published, and it's really cool. This one is from December 1957.
Okay.
And so it's got some really cool post-war kind of atomic era artwork on
Yeah.
it. But the topic of that month's specific newsletter is cans, an exciting new market for
Oh,
aluminum.
how about that?
And the artwork on this cover page is different concepts for can labels. We have sardines, we have
Oh,
cosmetics, we have
yeah.
oil, we have all these different products that these new aluminum cans
Yeah.
can contain. And
Yeah.
it's just so cool to look at this artifact of a time when aluminum cans are not just the standard ubiquitous,
Right.
that's what all cans are made of, sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And Henry J. Kaiser was probably, well, he was wrong. And several of his forecasts and prognostications, he thought, for example, that he could make a lot of money selling aluminum foil. And all his lieutenants, and he was so often so right. Then when he was wrong, it's boss, there's no way it's not going to happen. Oh yeah, we can make cans and put sardines in them, and beer and TV dinners, and we can sell foil to like household, people run a kitchen and whatever. And that was not a consistent money maker for him. But he continued. That was a pet project for his to make money with things like can stock and foil and so forth. Now, if I understand correctly, that's not how Kaiser Aluminum is making money now. Kaiser Aluminum is making now in aerospace, right? And they've dropped a lot of things like low profitability, things like Kaiser foil, because it just didn't. Aluminum foil is not where Kaiser made money ever, in spite of the fact that Kaiser wanted it so badly.
Yeah.
He didn't always get it right.
Hmm. In your research, did you get into a lot of the more sort of personal aspects of Kaiser here in town? For example, there was Kara, the Kaiser Employee Recreation Area, and the yearly picnic, which
Oh, that's so
they were a
interesting.
huge deal here. Did you ever
No,
encounter that?
but I did. I found that when because I've been digging so long in Kaiser Steel, the exact same thing in Kaiser Steel out in Southern California. So, in fact, you can go on Facebook now, and there's like sites for Kaiser Steel, Fontana, and people who are either workers there or the children of employees there, right? We'll talk about how they love the Christmas party at Kaiser Steel, or the Easter egg hunts on the steel plant every year, and the parties they had every year, and so forth. And so, I'm, I smiled immediately when you said that, not because I'd heard it before, but because I had seen it happen with the steel operation. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of really fond memories of that area, and it seems like Kaiser really was trying to look out for his employees here and give them a lot of sort of shared communal experiences that would really
right.
enhance the quality of life here. And actually, if anybody's interested, on the City of Ravenswood's YouTube page, we have old video footage of one of those yearly picnics at the
Wow,
Kara property.
I've never seen such a thing.
Yeah. So if
Wow, that's
anybody's
fantastic.
interested, yeah, find it on it's a old film reel that we have in our collection that we got digitized, and you
Oh,
can
right.
access it on the
Okay.
City of Ravenswood's
Yeah.
Facebook page.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, when you think about it, Kaiser is a businessman, and him wanting to be a maverick, he loved to be a maverick, like the show and so forth, and he loved thumbing his nose at established leadership and so forth. And he did bring a lot of innovation to production, most notably women in his shipyards. He would also his early advocate of using diesel engines on his equipment, and so he would oftentimes look at new ways of making things, innovative ways of looking and making things. But as far as I can tell in his aluminum and steel making, I'm not sure he was the most innovative in terms of production. You know, his Kaiser car, for example, I love my Kaiser car. I've had it for 40 years. There's not one innovative thing on that car. It's completely conventional in its engineering. I love it, but it's in terms of like how it's laid out and built. Now, Kaiser wanted to have front wheel drive and torsion bar suspension, never happened. Kaiser wanted to have an aluminum body, didn't happen. Kaiser wanted to set up a great big plant in California where he was based. Nope, outside of Ypsilanti near Detroit, right? So a very conventional car, really. His steel operation, where he tried to be innovative was in public relations and with employee relations. And it was a strike-free facility for years, which was novel. And so it's on the human side where Kaiser was innovative. But that steel plant was not the first to use a continuous caster. It was not the first to use all oxygen furnaces and so forth. He was kind of early, but he wasn't sort of like a trailblazer when it comes to production itself. So, you know, it's interesting. I think Kaiser is an innovator. He was an innovator in some ways, but I think you identify those things that tend to be very innovative once he became a manufacturer, and that's in like human relations, which he used to speak on. He used to actually have a speech that human relations and abundant happiness and stuff like that would be a title of his speeches he used to give. So that is where he liked to be innovative, and then that folds over into his healthcare too, and giving that and a good price, a really competitive price to his employees. That was where he was innovative, not with production itself, ironically enough.
That is really interesting, but I mean that's so important though,
Yeah.
that he was that kind of business leader.
Yep. Yeah.
So we're still taking comments and questions from the chat,
Mm.
but I have another question in the
Yeah.
meantime. So with any deep dive research like this, you often kind of open a can of worms and you end up creating more questions than you answer.
Oh,
So
yeah.
did you encounter that? And what are some future, questions that you'd love to pursue in this research?
Well, actually the question that I have, we just touched on, right? And that was, when he entered aluminum making, which is, I think, of most interest to your audience and you probably, right? He wasn't just like, well, I'm making steel and magnesium. I'll just make this sort of lateral move to another metal. At the same time, he was taking on all manner of things, from houses to washing machine or to dishwashers, to broadcasting, and so I don't understand the thinking there. That why would you want to? So from my perspective, as maybe a more conservative person, to spread yourself so thinly. He had this amazing cadre of younger guys who would move mountains for him, right? And he could count on them to do seemingly everything, but he never seemed to worry about burning them out or anything. And he had endless energy himself. And so I was just I would really like to know, because he's so alone to be this kind of business person. That what animated him to do something so very different, which is to take on so many things at once. I must say I'm left scratching my head after talking with people and reading things. I don't understand why you want to do so many diverse things at once.
Yeah, it seems that he just had this sort of mind where he was just constantly, curious about new things,
Yes, yeah,
trying
and
new things.
tireless.
And
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
understand that he was the kind of guy. These guys this cadre who'd work very closely with him. He'd call them at 2 a.m. He'd call during their kids' birthdays and say, "Don't worry, I'll just keep you a couple of minutes." He'll harangue them for hours on the phone. It's odd. People would walk over broken glass for him. But he asked so much of them.
Yeah, yeah. That
But
is really interesting.
he's an
But
interesting guy. I think I would have liked him. I think he was a very likable man.
yeah,
But I'm
seems
not
like
sure I'd
it.
want to work for him, to be honest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it's good that even though he, I guess, even though he asked so much, he gave so much,
Oh, he
and
did.
I think
Yep.
that's very
You know,
important.
when he died in 1967, the Congress made the statement and released it. And President Johnson at the time released a statement. Several foreign leaders marked his passing. He was a thing. Henry J. Kaiser was a thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think as far as his impact here, there's a number of these comments that, talk about how Kaiser's impact on their families' lives, but I think Debbie
Uh,
Holmes really sums it up really well.
yeah.
I came to Ravenswood at age 6, 1958, and Kaiser changed the trajectory of so many of our lives. And
That's amazing.
I hear that all the time at the museum that
Oh,
somebody came here, as a kid.
yep,
Their parents
yep.
came for Kaiser, and then they ended up staying, for several generations. And he just brought so much prosperity to the town. He brought so much opportunity to the town,
Yep.
and it's still, visible today.
Is there a Kaiser Hospital or Kaiser Permanente there in Ravenswood?
There isn't a Kaiser Permanente, but Kaiser did contribute to building the Jackson County General Hospital
Oh,
in Ripley.
I see. Okay.
He it's not named after him, but he was involved in
Mm,
that build.
I
Because
see.
previously all the hospitals in the area were, in a Victorian house, in town, that kind of thing. Like
Yeah,
the older generation of hospitals.
right.
And
Mm.
and the Kaiser, or sorry, the Jackson County General Hospital is still what we use today, all
Oh,
these years
wow.
later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wasn't born to wealth, Kaiser. He was to a working family, and so and he's although he was worth millions. I have read nothing about him living in opulence. Nothing about it. He did have a really expensive car for a while. If there's anyone out there who's a real car aficionado, he had a Marmon, very high powered, very large car in the 1920s, a big yellow one. He used to drive insanely fast. No one wanted to drive with Henry Kaiser. Back in the 30s and 20s, people are driving 40 miles an hour. He'd go 80, and that Marmon could go 80. He'd go 80 and 90 miles an hour. So he liked fast cars. He also liked speedboats. So he'd spend his money here and there. He used to hang out with Guy Lombardo at Lake Tahoe, and they'd run around and go fast in boats. But other than that, he really didn't live like his house. I've seen his house. It's a nice house, but it's not a mansion. I understand there's no gold plated fixtures. It's not that kind of house. He's not that kind of guy. So he made a lot of money, but he didn't live an extravagant lifestyle. He was once again a man of fairly simple means and tastes.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, well, we appear to be at the end of our comments. But if anybody, wants to watch this video later, has a comment later, you're welcome to still add a comment to the video and we'll try to get it answered. And the presentation will remain on the City of Ravenswood's YouTube page for anybody who wants to view it later. And again, we really apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning, and we're very, very glad that you were able to join us anyway. If you know of anybody who missed this presentation because of the technical difficulties, please share the new link with them. And we really hope that they'll be able to, view the new video and enjoy it. And as I said, if you have any questions that didn't get answered, you can reach out to us and we'd love to continue this conversation. Also, Dr. Dias mentioned his book on Kaiser steel. If anybody is interested in this book, we have a select amount of copies available at the museum, and first come, first served. So reach out to us as soon as you can, and we can get you one of those books for free as a thank you for attending this presentation. We hope everybody's enjoyed this. We've really enjoyed it. And another huge, huge thank you to Professor Dias for lending us his time and expertise. Our next event is going to be a Jackson County Trivia Night on Friday, January 19th at 6 p.m. If you're interested in that and other museum happenings, we'd like to invite you to follow us on Facebook. Again, we are the Great Bend Museum. And keep an eye out for all our monthly news columns in the newspaper as well. Thank you again, everybody, for coming. We hope that you had a great time and have a good evening.
Thank you all.